welcome to What a Ranker, and on today's episode we are going to be looking at, analysing and ranking the albums of Genesis. Genesis, quite a confusing band at first glance, multiple lineups, 2 different singers and a sprawling web of solo projects from every member. They were one of the most highly regarded progressive rock bands of the 70s, and then, in the 80s, one of the biggest commercial pop acts around. Their drummer turned singer, Phil Collins, went on to a massively successful solo career that, in terms of sales, eclipsed even Genesis themselves. But his blockbuster fame, often critically scorned, has cast a long shadow over the band's legacy. Sure, his popularity helped Genesis sell records in the 80s, but it might have also robbed them of some well-earned respect in hindsight. These days, the word Genesis has become a bit of a dirty word. If you are trying to keep it cool in a music conversation, you have to say, I like Peter Gabriel's Genesis, otherwise you might not be invited back to the next party. Funny enough, Gabriel also had a huge pop solo career in the late 80s that outshone his time in the band commercially. But charts and sales aren't really the point here. The real question is, are they any good? With 15 studio albums from 1969's From Genesis to Revelation to 1997's Calling All Stations, we're going to dig in and find out. And so, without further ado, let's get this thing started. Lots of people say they didn't even listen to this album because Genesis without Phil Collins isn't Genesis. That's a shite argument. This is a band where members kept leaving. If you could stomach Genesis after Peter Gabriel left, Steve Hackett left, you can stomach it after Phil left. Especially since where Phil took them by the late 80s wasn't exactly top-tier genius. Nah, I don't respect that closed-minded take. But if you did listen to this album and still hate it, yeah, I respect that. Coming in dead last, the dreary, bloated Calling All Stations. After Phil left, they brought in Ray Wilson on vocals. But it's like an actor giving a bad performance because the script is garbage. The guy can sing, but the writing on this album is awful. Horrible 90s production, inconsistent tracks that somehow manage to sound consistently dull. It's about 7.5 hours long. God, 90s albums were so bloated, stuffing every second of CD space. Albums aren't meant to be that long, but even if you cut this album in half, it'd still be bad. I can't find any positives here. Even the album's artwork is atrocious. What is that? Beyond the weak songs, the whole thing feels dark, dingy and boring. By the end of Phil's run, Genesis had gone super poppy. But at least you could call it fun. They dressed up, made kooky videos. It was artistically bankrupt, sure, but a laugh, no laughs, just misery. The best thing about Calling All Stations is the riff in the first 20 seconds of the first song. After that, all downhill to the bottom. Last place, 2 out of 10. People think of Genesis as a 70s and 80s band, and that makes sense because the 2 albums they released in the 90s are their weakest. Phil's swan song, We Can't Dance, is superior to Calling All Stations, but I mean, that really doesn't mean much. It's still a slog. An album mostly known for a silly walk probably isn't going to be that great. However, I like the walk. It's fun. And I do actually have some positive things to say about this album. One is that I Like Jesus He Knows Me, a satirical take on televangelism and religious hypocrisy, and a catchy upbeat single. Unfortunately, the rest of the album isn't so upbeat, and again, like Calling All Stations, is just such a slog to get all the way through. It's just so bloody long. And here on What a Ranker, that counts. Bloat on an album counts against it. If it's on the album, it's getting judged. It's just big ballad after ballad. I just can't stand it. Glossy, overproduced, long drawn out ballads with nothing lyrics. No Son of Mine is an okay opener, and if it was just 3 minutes, it might be alright. But it's nearly 7 minutes long, which just isn't on. I Can't Dance doesn't take itself too seriously, so I can just about live with it. Don't get me wrong, it's crap, but it doesn't actually make me feel sick. Also, we have to remember, as this is a Genesis album, we can't just blame Phil. Mike Rutherford has blood in his hands with his sickly guitar playing sounds and Tony Banks' limp keys. Banks is one of the keyboard greats, but here he might as well be anyone plodding along on his keyboard. In fact, he's not even plodding. Plodding would have been better. Overall, this is a bad album. That being said, apparently this album sold about 15 million copies, their biggest selling album. Which goes to show, as always, you cannot trust the masses. In the words of Superhands,
people like Coldplay and voted for the Nazis. You can't trust people, Jeremy.
And apparently, they bought We Can't Dance in droves. We Can't Dance gets 3 out of 10.
The silence that never shines.
So, at number 13, I've gone for the debut album, From Genesis to Revelation, which feels a bit unfair as the band have kind of disowned it as a false start of sorts. They think of Trespass as their actual debut. This record sounds decent if you're into 60s rock pop, which I very much am. I could have ranked this higher, as the sound does appeal to me more than their slick 80s sound does later on. But the songwriting here is very basic, and there's nothing to separate it from other bands of the era. Fair dues though, considering their ages at the time, they were basically still teenagers. Peter Gabriel's singing is a lot more standard here, and he doesn't really show off any of the flair or theatrics he'd show off in a few years. The production is all very basic for the time. The album is kind of an anomaly in their catalogue because its weaknesses come more from inexperience and youth. They haven't found their sound here yet. But it's not like other albums on this list where they should have known better. This is just a very young band trying to find themselves, wearing their influences on their sleeves before carving out their own sound. No extended solos or surreal storytelling yet, just nice harmonies, harpsichords and strings, which is no bad thing. But there are other bands doing it much better in the 60s. The production is a bit lackluster too. It's the kind of record that sounds good on first listen, but on second you realise there's nothing else to discover here. I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. At 12, I've gone for 1986's Invisible Touch. Probably the most 80s sounding album I've ever heard. It opens with maybe their biggest hit, the dismal Invisible Touch. This song and the album as a whole I think probably plays a big part in people's hatred for Genesis. This is where the line between Phil Collins' solo career and Genesis gets blurred. The old prog Genesis slowly being beaten out by 80s pop Genesis year by year finally gives way here. As a fan of great pop, this is not. Well, in my opinion, which is probably wrong because this album had multiple hits, some worse than others. Land of Confusion is a decentish single with an interesting sound and musical intro that shows little glimpses of old Genesis before falling into a full-blown 80s pop number. I'd still rather listen to Duran Duran than any of this. It's music they put in the film or TV show to scream, "We're smack bang in the middle of the 80s." Where this album beats previous records I've trashed is its energy and confidence. It isn't slow or subtle, which I appreciate more than the 90s albums that move like dying whales. This is a proper pop record, clocking in at 46 minutes, which is very short for Genesis. If you love 80s pop, you'll probably like this, but it's not art pop by this point, it's proper Radio 2 mums music. Domino Parts 1 and 2 are kind of interesting, showing a half-hearted attempt to tickle those old prog tendencies, and the final instrumental Brazilian is decent, and it's quite nice not having Phil shouting over the top of it. In reality, this is a relic of its time, and they were actually successful in what they were trying to achieve. But it's got Genesis on the cover, so technically this is the same band that made Foxtrot, so I'm giving them a 5 out of 10 for Invisible Touch. Next up, we have 1978's Literally Named, and Then There Were Three. Guitarist Steve Hackett decided he'd had enough and packed his bags after Wind and Wuthering. Interestingly, they didn't try to replace him. Instead, bassist Mike Rutherford took over guitar duties and bass from then on. I think hiring a new guitarist could have added a whole new positive dimension to the band, but they decided against it. Maybe for financial reasons, who knows. Straight out the gate we have a massive problem.
Mike is a great bassist, and he deserves much more credit in the bass world than he gets, but Steve Hackett is a far better guitarist.
Steve Hackett is an unbelievably talented player who added textures, layers, and explosive solos to their sounds, even on tracks he wasn't officially credited for. The first track on And Then There Were Three is a bit of a red herring because it's very proggy. 10/8 time signature, it almost makes me think of Yes. Great performances all round, Phil's drumming is top notch. The song itself isn't a masterpiece, but the energy is great, and energy is welcome after the beautiful but slow-paced Wind and Wuthering. The opener feels like a statement. We've still got it, even without Steve and Peter.
Unfortunately, next track Undertow starts and proves they are not the same band.
Now, I don't think they're trying to be the same band. There's a clear push towards accessibility and commercialism. The awful ballads begin here. Mike Rutherford's Sickly Snowbound might be my least favourite song in their entire catalogue. With Steve gone, much of the strangeness is left too. Tony Banks, the keyboard genius, is losing the battle between experimentation and slow ballads. While this is the first album as a trio, sonically it fits more with the two previous albums released, but artistically, much less successful. Think of it as Return of the Jedi compared to A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back.
Unfair to Return of the Jedi, but you get my point.
Notice I keep saying worst artistically and not just worse, because strangely, the worse they got artistically, the more successful they became. The final song, Follow You, Follow Me, was their first decent hit, kickstarting what would soon become their 80s pop era. They were definitely courting new fans. Can't imagine the hairy prog hippies were thrilled. And Then There Were Three is fascinating to analyse in hindsight. It's a transitional album, but on its own, it's pretty boring. Aside from the opener, the prog bits were done better earlier, and the pop bits were done better later. 5 out of 10 for And Then There Were Three. It's 1983. Phil Collins is now a global pop megastar, and Genesis fully break into the mega mainstream with their self-titled album, Genesis.
But how good is it?
While it doesn't sound as 80s drenched as their next album, 1986's Invisible Touch, it's still firmly planted in the decade. The opener, Mama, a fan favourite, doesn't click for me. It's far too long, and Phil screaming does my nutting, although I do like the little weird laugh he does. There are some positives here though. After Mama we get a nice little run of tunes. That's All is a McCartney-esque earworm, let down only by its slick 80s production. Swap those synths for organic instruments and it would be a belter, but still a decent pop tune. Next up, Highlights Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea are essentially one big Genesis-style proggy pop epic split into 2 tracks. Whether you count them as 2 songs or 1, they're great. Many fans call this an album of 2 halves. Strong start, weak finish. I get that, but I'll defend Silver Rainbow. Tony Banks' keys are stellar here, and the backing vocals are great.
It's like an 80s Beach Boys track, except better than most actual 80s Beach Boys tracks.
The closer is gonna get better, also slaps with its sweet chorus-heavy bass line. That said, I'll forgive anyone who taps out early. The middle of the album is a slog, taking it all too hard and just a job to do a pant. An illegal alien? Well, the less said about that, the better.
The only thing worse than bad pop is slightly racist bad pop.
This is the first Genesis album where no member brought pre-written songs to the table. Everything was just jammed out and written together. The result? Cohesion. This album has a consistent sound and doesn't suffer from the solo songwriters writing different types of songs, which some of the other records do a bit. Production wise, this is a well produced record. It obviously suffered from that 80s sheen, but there are interesting textures all over this album, and while they're clearly chasing commercial appeal, they still try to stay ahead of trends, a strength that kept them relevant while their proggy peers faded into obscurity. The verdict, a decent album, albeit not essential. 6 out of 10 for 1983's Genesis. In ninth place, we have 1980's Duke. So many other people have this album so much higher, calling it the last gasp at prog or their final truly great album. I'm afraid I have to disagree. The album has 12 tracks, but originally the tracks Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide Vocal, Turn It On Again, Duke's Travels and Duke's End were one 30-minute epic about a bloke named Albert. For whatever reason, musical trends, fear of repeating themselves, they split it up and scattered the pieces across the album, bookending it with Turn It On Again in the middle. Start strong, end strong, and I'll admit, Turn It On Again is a cracker. That one bass note in the chorus, boom. It's a glimpse of the Abacab sound to come. Behind the Lines is a stonking opener track. Genesis always know how to open albums, and this is no exception. At first, I thought it was cheesy, but now I'm addicted. Tony Banks' piano chords are the star here, and it's a fun, bouncy rebound from the snooze fest that was And Then There Were Three. The sudden shift into Duchess works nicely, and that chanting chorus is stupidly catchy. Guide vocal is weak but short, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. Now, the sludge. Mike's Man of Our Times is a classic bloated Rutherford. Not his worst, but still a chore. Phil's Misunderstanding is simple but weirdly catchy. Mike should be arrested by the Boring Police for Alone Again. If I ranked my worst Genesis songs, Mike's tunes would dominate. He writes pop like an actor churns out Oscar bait. Cul-de-sac has cool Tony Banks piano and a nice groove. But Phil's shouty vocals great and the lyrics are leftover fantasy slop, kings, queens, wars. Tony was still stuck in Middle Earth whilst Phil and Mike were writing about love and breakups. Phil's Please Don't Ask is awful. Sure, it's raw emotion about his divorce, but the lyrics, oh you've lost some weight, are Brian Wilson-esque lyrics, but without a Brian Wilson-esque melody. X Factor balladry at its worst. Then Duke's Travels saves the day, a blast of fun prog, proof they could still play as a band even if their solo songs were not up to much. So, Duke is a strong start-finish, sandwiching mostly mid to bad filler. 6.5 out of 10. Next up at number 8, we've got 1981's Abacab. This was neck and neck with Duke. Both albums have strengths and flaws, but while Abacab shoves its bad songs to the end, Duke scatters them around, which somehow is more annoying. Abacab is an album that really splits Genesis fans. I've seen a lot of people put it in the bottom few albums. This album isn't really in the pop bass or the prog bass. It is uniquely a new wave art pop album. Mostly group written with one solo song per member. Let's get the trash out first. Mike Rutherford's Like It or Not is dismal. Love Mike as a bassist, but his songs, soppy love ballads with no tune. He's schmaltzier than Phil. Phil's Man on the Corner isn't much better, and the closer Another Record really does get you reaching for another record to put on. Apart from the weak ending though, I do like Abacab. Synth heavy, gated drums, mostly upbeat. They still sound like a rock band here, just soaked in 80s weirdness. The synths getting nasty in places. Phil's vocals are not overly produced, and honestly, this is their only album where they feel like an indie rock band. Let's say a few hot takes. Whodunit gets too much hate. Yeah, it's silly, but it's a fun mess around with punk new wave vibes, kind of like Ian Dury-ish. Not their best, but Genesis has made way worse songs. People whine about the horns on No Reply At All. It's not the Genesis sound. But, who cares? The horns work for this song. Me and Sarah Jane is my favourite song on this album. It's a Tony Banks written number, it's experimental and proggy, and would probably crack my top 10 Genesis songs. It moves between sections like the old days, but with a new wave edge that almost gives it Stranglers vibes, which is always a good thing for me. Keep It Dark is strong, and when Dodo Lurker's riff kicks in, it is great. The first 2/3 of this album are good art pop. The cover art's abstract squiggles fit the sound perfectly. The last 3 tracks do drag the album down though, and stop it reaching any higher on this list. If they could have kept the quality through to the end, this would definitely rise up a few places. Changing direction was always going to upset people, but even if you hate the shift, Abacab's a solid attempt at something new, and they never made anything this good again. That being said, in the grand scheme of things, this still can't quite make it to 7 out of 10. So I'm giving it 6.8 out of 10.
Looking for someone, I guess I'm
At number 7 we have Trespass. Technically their second album, but in many ways this feels like their first proper album. The moment they truly start sounding like Genesis, far more musically adventurous than their debut, it experiments with a mix of acoustic folk and heavier driving tracks, laying the groundwork for their signature progressive rock sound. The album is drenched in Mellotron and 12-string guitars, and honestly, it's a strong record. From the very first second, Peter Gabriel's voice leaps out on Looking for Someone. Richer, more theatrical, and infinitely more confident than on their debut. He sounds powerful, wise, almost wizard-like, which is astonishing considering he's probably barely 20 years old here. No Genesis release after his departure in 1975 ever fully recovers from him leaving as vocalist. Lyrically, it's very much of its time. Mythological tales, pastoral imagery, and shadowy angels. But that's fine, it suits the music. The lyrics don't distract, they simply add to the atmosphere, letting the music take centre stage. The Knife is the standout track and usually gets the most praise. For good reason, it's raw and explosive, but the whole album holds up. The DNA of Genesis' 70s sound is already here. The folky mystique, the theatrical swells, the ambition. Weaknesses? The performances and production aren't flawless. Anthony Phillips still on guitar here and the band leader at this point. His playing is solid, no complaints, but he left after this album due to personal struggles, making way for Steve Hackett's classical precision on later records. The real issue is the drumming. It's loose and uneven, sometimes feeling out of sync, as if the band isn't fully locked in. Rhythmically, Trespass stumbles, which makes Phil Collins' arrival afterward feel like a revelation. Not only did he tighten the grooves, but his backing vocals also become integral to their classic sound, and this doesn't get mentioned enough, I don't think. The production is too muddy, some tracks sound oversaturated or distorted in a way that feels accidental and not artistic. On the plus side, the cover artwork, the first of 3 by Paul Whitehead, perfectly captures the album's medieval mythic vibes. Overall, Trespass is where Genesis find their sound, but they're just getting started. The albums that follow will refine, expand and perfect it. For now, this is a flawed but fascinating blueprint. 7 out of 10 for 1970s Trespass. Promise is showing and the ball is rolling. In at number 6 we have 1976's Wind and Wuthering, Genesis' second album without Peter Gabriel, released later the same year after the maybe slightly surprising success of A Trick of the Tail. It's probably their most atmospheric album, very English sounding, moody, autumnal, and richly textured, with Tony Banks' lush keyboards and Steve Hackett's evocative guitar work dominating the sound. The title nods to Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, reflecting the album's brooding, windswept vibe. The sleeve art matches this perfectly. When Genesis are good, they always nail that synergy between visuals and sound, and this is a prime example. Released in mid-December, it almost gives off Christmassy vibes, frosty and fireside cozy. The album balances sprawling epics like One for the Vine, 11th Earl of Mar, with tighter, atmospheric pieces like Your Own Special Way and Blood on the Rooftops. Your Own Special Way is one of those sickly Mike Rutherford pop songs that would plague later albums, but I find it easier to stomach here. Maybe it's the luscious 70s production smoothing things over. Sonically, it is very good. Arguably their best sounding album? Probably not, but the various sounds on this album are very effective. The chord structures are great, with little musical phrases scattered everywhere, creating a beautiful tapestry. Hackett's guitar and Banks' keys play off each other brilliantly, and Phil's drumming keeps things rhythmically interesting as usual. But the singing, Peter Gabriel's absence feels more obvious here than on Trick of the Tail. Phil's voice often sounds whiny and weak, The instrumental passages are far better than the parts with vocals on them. This record improves after multiple listens, and it's definitely not an instantly accessible album, although it does show hints of where they will go in the future with a more pop direction. Steve Hackett left after this album, reportedly feeling underused. Some fans complain his guitar is too quiet in the mix, but honestly, the keys and guitars blend so well together. If I'm being completely honest, I can't even always tell who's playing what, but it works. Still, once Steve Hackett left, the band never sounds as musically intriguing again. His classical flair added a sophistication. Even though I don't rate any post-Wind and Wuthering albums higher, I get why they had to shift gears after this release. This sound wasn't going to cut it in the late 70s. It's the least punk album ever, plodding along at times with zero rock edge, but I do enjoy it. Next time it snows, if that ever happens again in this country, I'll probably stick it on. A flawed but cosy listen. 7.1 out of 10 for Wind and Wuthering.
Old King Cole was a merry old soul, and
In at 5, we have 1971's Nursery Crime. The first album with the classic lineup: Phil Collins on drums, Steve Hackett on guitar, joining Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel. Straight out the gate, this album hits you with The Musical Box, a song that takes everything from the Trespass album and improves it in every way. Peter Gabriel's lyrics here are dark and menacing, but also playful. At 10.5 minutes long, it's just such a great song. What I love about Genesis at their best is they do these long, interesting songs that feel epic, whilst also whimsical and quintessentially English. If Syd Barrett had kept his shit together, this might have been the stuff Pink Floyd would have written. The Musical Box is the best thing on this album, but the rest stays strong. Return of the Giant Hogweed is a clever, funny song with a good, though slightly ridiculous, lyric from Gabriel. If it's a good lyric in this band, you can almost always assume it's from Peter. He's not exactly Leonard Cohen, but he seems to take the words more seriously, probably as he's singing them. The others will often stick in words that don't quite fit to the tune or don't sing particularly well. Performance-wise, everyone is on top form. Steve Hackett's guitar shines all over the album here, with soaring guitar solos and his use of tapping, which I must admit, I didn't realise people were doing this technique in the early 70s.
A friend at uni once told me Van Halen invented tapping. He was obviously talking shite.
Tony Banks' mellotron swells, but it is actually quite subtle compared to some of his later keys parts on Genesis albums. Phil Collins' explosive drums keep the band together whilst being very creative himself. It seems on Trespass all the band helped out with the various drum parts and ideas. However, once Phil joined, that was no longer needed. He was in control of the drum sound from this point onwards, and he does a great job here. Mike Rutherford's bass lines at this point are really fun too. In a way, it feels like the whole band are competing with each other musically. But it works, and together they create this blend of whimsical storytelling, complex arrangements, weird structures, and shifting time signatures. There's a confidence here that wasn't on Trespass. Phil's backing vocals complement Gabriel's lead perfectly, especially on Harold the Barrel and the folky Harlequin. Nursery Crime still has that organic Baroque style like Trespass, and it's the last time they mess with folky vibes before going full-blown proggy on Foxtrot. I did have Nursery Crime higher on this list for a while, but after sitting with them all for a few months I bumped it down. As good as it is, it's still a slightly transitional album into the next few, and that's where they really kick into top gear. Nursery Crime gets a 7.5 out of 10. Getting close to the top now, and in 4th place is an album that almost every list ranks very high, with many people having it as their number 1. After Gabriel left, Steve Hackett stayed for the next 2 albums, Wind and Wuthering, and our number 4 pick, A Trick of the Tail. And these still sound more like classic Genesis than the later records. Peter Gabriel left the band in 1975 after the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour finished. I think they were pretty scared of the whole situation. The press had started to act like the singer was the complete driving force, not the whole band. Gabriel leaves, and they try finding a new singer with no luck. Some articles say Phil Collins reluctantly took over vocals, others claim he was waiting for them to ask him. Personally, I'll go with the second. They always seemed reluctant to replace anyone who left.
Crucially, Collins didn't quit the drums, he now did both.
Though he wasn't writing songs yet, and that's why this album works. It still feels like a Genesis album. Musically, it's arguably the most Genesis sounding thing ever. Tony Banks, who really is the sound of Genesis, takes complete control of the songwriting and is involved in every track. And with Peter gone, Banks could really let loose. Maybe their most consistent work. I don't skip anything, even the slower ballady tracks are musically interesting, full of complex chords pianists love. Phil's drumming is amazing, rocking out everywhere. I'm no drummer, so I struggle to analyse why it works, but here it's playful, interesting and never boring.
The drums sound louder in the mix than on earlier albums, and we do know where that leads in the end.
But here, it works. Rutherford's bass is integral and him and Phil are locked in. It's exciting when bass and drums sync perfectly. Steve Hackett's guitar is less prominent, but still part of the sound. All 4 members are on top form. Musical performances for this album get a 10 out of 10. The album mixes rockers and slower songs. Ripples is the most sentimental track, a bit sickly, but their best soppy song, with gorgeous instrumental breaks. Dance on a Volcano is a banging opener. Every song here takes you on a journey. After losing their singer post-Lamb, this album deserves huge credit. They proved Genesis wasn't just a Peter Gabriel show. But there is another side. Trick of the Tail proved Gabriel wasn't everything, but you still miss him. Phil's doing a Gabriel impression here. A good idea to soften the shock of a new voice. Honestly, I wish he'd kept that in the 80s instead of his shouty pop phase. But it's just an impression. He lacks Gabriel's theatrics and rich tone. We also miss Gabriel's lyrics. After Lamb's wordy density, Trick puts lyrics on the back burner. Overall, Trick of the Tail is one of the best examples of a band keeping the ship afloat after their singer leaves, and many people put this at number 1. It can't break the top 3 for me because I just miss Peter Gabriel too much. I am giving Trick of the Tail 7.8 out of 10.
Like a fly, waiting for the windshield on the freeway.
The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Yes, the last to feature singer Peter Gabriel. A sprawling, surreal concept album.
A proper 70s double album, complete with a mad storyline and everything.
The story follows the hallucinatory journey of Rael, Puerto Rican street punk in New York City, as he navigates a nightmarish underworld in search of his identity and brother. Unlike previous albums where different members wrote lyrics and music that were then worked on together, this time Peter Gabriel handled the lyrics while the band created the music. This gives the album a unique sound in their catalogue, very vocal and lyrically heavy, merging complex arrangements, shifting time signatures and intricate instrumental passages with theatrical storytelling. The album feels darker and sleazier than their earlier works. Where Selling England by the Pound was all about the Englishness, this one's rooted in New York, with Gabriel consciously pushing for a completely different vibe. Often called a prog classic, to me this album sounds closer to David Bowie than other progressive rock acts of the time. I mean, there are still a few long moments like In the Cage and The Colony of Slipperman, but tracks like Counting Out Time and The Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging are tighter and punchier than anything they've done before. The story is quite bonkers, and to be honest, I don't think you need to keep up with it to enjoy the album. Like Ziggy Stardust, you don't have to care about the rock alien stuff to love the music. The songs all work on their own and are full of imagery and ideas that really place the listener in 70s New York. Well, 70s New York according to Gabriel. It's just a great collection of tracks flowing into each other nicely. Peter Gabriel's singing is rockier here, full of cool screams, and he delivers the whole album flawlessly from start to finish, with Phil Collins perfectly backing him up on vocals. Carpet Crawlers is a prime example of their voices working together. The chorus almost gives me goosebumps. And don't listen to that 90s remake, it's an abomination. fact that Gabriel wrote nearly all the lyrics, give or take, track here and there, really helps the album flow. No clunky lines stick out like sore thumbs. This is actually quite a cool album, which isn't where I'd usually place Genesis. They aren't typically sunglasses and leather jacket sounding. You could throw this on late at night. It's got Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, New York vibes in places. I would recommend this to friends I would never suggest another Genesis record to. Some critics argue it should have been a single album, but people say that about the White Album too. That's the point of old school doubles, madness and excess. To be fair, The Lamb is fairly consistent, and yeah, the second disc isn't as strong as the first, but most single albums slump in the second half anyway. And if you're gonna pad an album with filler, Genesis are the band to do it. The double format adds to the experience. You sit down to listen like it's a movie. I mean, it's over 90 minutes long, full of highlights, but my favourite moment is Fly on a Windshield bleeding into Broadway melody of 1974. Gabriel whispering over those jagged guitars gives me chills. So many emotions packed into a few minutes. Musically, the band feels slightly hemmed in by the lyrics, with fewer instrumental passages, but that's not a bad thing. Not every album needs endless keyboard solos. And let's be clear, I'm comparing this to prior Genesis albums.
There is still more musicality here than on most artists' records.
The second disc does let them flex a bit more as they stretch the runtime.
Production-wise, it can sound muddy and rough in spots.
Vocals dominate the mix, sometimes burying the music in a boxy haze, like it's overcompressed to keep Gabriel front and centre. Odd, since John Burns, who produced Selling England and Foxtrot, helmed this too, but it's not quite as crisp here. The opener, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, although a popular song, doesn't really do much for me. It's a bit of a nothing song really, and although it does represent the album well, they could have started the album stronger. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a very ambitious album, and quite unique in their catalogue. They don't really have anything else that sounds like this, and if you are a fan of this album, I would probably recommend following Peter Gabriel's solo albums from this point onwards rather than follow on Genesis, as Trick of the Tail definitely does not really build on this album, but goes back more to the ideas and sounds from Selling England by the Pound. I'm giving The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway 8.5 out of 10, as even though I think it works better as a double album than a single album, some parts of the album don't feel as finished as others, and production is a little bit muddy. But overall, this is a great album and deserves the praise. Here we go! In at number 2, we have Selling England by the Pound. This seems to get the number 1 slot in most lists, except for one list where a guy had it at number 12. He put the self-titled at number 1.
I mean, that list was like a bad fever dream.
But yeah, most people have this at the top, and that's not a bad take at all. This was the first Genesis album I heard, and the one that made me take notice. It's a really good album. The first 20 minutes of this thing are incredible. 10 out of 10. Dancing with the Moonlit Night sets the scene. Lyrics about traditional English culture with surreal imagery with 20th century disillusionment. Opens with Gabriel's lone a cappella voice, erupts into the band's bombastic playing, then ends with acoustic fingerpicking. The song never lets up. It's perfect 8 minutes. Next comes their first hit. And as far as I'm concerned, the best single they ever made, I Know What I Like, In Your Wardrobe. A Beatlesy number that's been stuck in my head on loop since I first heard it.
It's really beginning to piss my girlfriend off. I can't stop humming it.
Then Firth of the Fifth, 9 minutes of perfection. Tony Banks' piano intro, Steve Hackett's guitar solo, Peter Gabriel's vocals. Yes, the first 3 tracks on this album are flawless. It's also English and silly, but also deeply moving. I love it. Then out of nowhere, we get More Fool Me. A Mike Rutherford, Phil Collins penned stinker, like an 80s song sent back in a time machine to plonk itself right in the middle of this classic album. And I'm not happy about it.
Like the Ghost of Christmas Future, it's sung by Phil.
It's bland, whiny, and why is it here? Quiet Number works, but it'd be nice if it was half decent. Side 2 starts with the Battle of Epping Forest. A lot of fans hate this one. I get it. It's busy, but I enjoy it. Gabriel's voices are fun and the lyrics are surreal. A battle in a forest where people eat sandwiches like it's a picnic. Confusing at first, but it grows on you. Selling England's strength is its light tone. The musicianship is serious, but the songs are fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. After the Ordeal is a nice medieval Steve Hackett guitar piece, fitting after Epping Forest chaos. The Cinema Show is a 10-minute romantic song with funky lyrics I believe are Tony Banks or Mike Rutherford's doing. Fans love it, but I think it's the weakest of the 4 long tracks. Though the second half rules when the band kicks out the jams, the outro is top notch. Isle of Plenty ends the album nicely by reprising the opener's melodies and themes. Performances are perfect throughout and the artwork fits the vibes perfectly, so yeah, listen to this album if you haven't. It's a great entry point for Genesis newbies, it's where I started and it's their most accessible good album. But More Fool Me and a few quirks stop it hitting number 1 for me, but 9 out of 10 for Selling England by the Pound.
If you go down to Willow Farm to look for butterflies, flutterbys, gutterflies, open your eyes, it's full of surprise. Everyone lies like the fox on the rocks. And the musical box. Oh, there's mum and dad and good and bad, and everyone's happy to be here.
So that means I've put Foxtrot at number 1.
And like a lot of the best albums, it actually took me a while to get into this one.
After hearing Selling England by the Pound, this album sounded messier and less polished at first, points that are probably still true in a way. But let's get this out there, I love the Mellotron. You don't hear it enough anymore. Just a few chords can create so much emotion, like in the opening track, Watcher of the Skies. What a weird, fascinating song. After that iconic Mellotron fades out, the band launches into this incredible rhythm. Phil Collins' drums and Mike Rutherford's bass are just driving along, locked into this complex groove.
I play bass myself and I would struggle to keep up with this.
But it sounds phenomenal. Then Peter Gabriel starts singing this strange melody. Next up is Timetable, a Tony Banks song with gorgeous piano throughout and a catchy chorus. Mike Rutherford's bass line is fantastic, he's really playing his heart out here. I'll admit it, I've criticised Mike's songwriting in this video, but the man is a killer bassist. Him and Phil, an unbeatable rhythm section. Then there's Get 'Em Out by Friday, which I think is Genesis' most underrated song. Their best lyric, hands down. It's a mini rock opera where Gabriel voices multiple characters. John Pebble, a sleazy corporate guy evicting tenants, and Mrs. Burrow, an old woman fighting to keep her home. The song tears into capitalist greed and honestly, it's even more relevant today with housing prices and greedy landlords. Because this is Genesis, the story spirals into sci-fi madness. By the end, the government is shrinking humans to cram more people into buildings. It's a genius and biting satire. Can Utility and Coastliners comes next. It's a decent track, but it has some brilliant instrumental moments, like Tony Banks absolutely shredding the keys around the 3:30 mark. Proper progging out here. Then side 1 ends and side 2 begins with Steve Hackett's 90-second acoustic guitar piece. And then comes Supper's Ready. Let me backtrack. When I first got into Genesis and was reading about them, everyone seemed to rave about this 23-minute epic. I listened and thought, it's fine, but why the obsession?
Maybe I'm not a sheep like these other fans. Maybe I'm different, and maybe I like different stuff.
But then the melody got stuck in my head, so I played it again, and I thought, well, this is actually amazing. A few listens later, yeah, they're right. This might be the greatest song ever made. It's a real mythic journey blending Bible stories, philosophy, and straight up weirdness. Winston Churchill in drag. Supper's Ready showcases Genesis' creativity, technical skill, and theatrical flair. Every second is flawless. It's emotional, bizarre, and packed with wild ideas, yet it all feels so cohesive. It flows like one epic story. This song is a roller coaster, the peak of what the Kinks or David Bowie tried with their concept albums. Imagine Hunky Dory, Village Green, Close to the Edge, and The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, tossed into a blender. That's Supper's Ready. Perfection. Foxtrot is a 10 out of 10 from me, and I don't give those out easily. Go listen to it right now.
Thank you for watching this episode of What a Ranker. Now off you go and listen to some Genesis, and maybe tell me what your ranking would be. Anyways, I'll catch you next time on What a Ranker.